All right, one more time for the year. This is part 27 and the very last part of the 8th chapter of Bava Kama, Perek HaChovel. And we are going to finish up some of the sort of storytelling material that we've been working on, and we even have a little bit of halachic material, sort of, this evening. Okay, we are going to be starting at toward the bottom of 92b. We are going to go to the bottom of 93a, which is where the chapter ends. So first, we start off still in the series of conversations between Rava and Rabbi Bar Mari, in which Rava keeps asking Rabbi Bar Mari for a Torah source for the idea embodied in a popular saying or a rabbinic saying. I think the ones this evening are all popular sayings. And some of them are a little odd, but I'll do my best trying to explain them. Okay. Amar li Rava Rabbi Bar Mari, minaha milta da Amri Inshi. So Rava asked Rabbi Bar Mari, where does this thing come from? People say, Harit chavracha v'lo anach rami guda rabba shadibe. If you called to your friend and he didn't answer you, then throw a large wall at him, or shove down a large wall and then throw it at him. That seems to mean that if you tried to ask for help from a friend and they didn't respond, that you should attack them or not be friends with them anymore, or something of that description. Okay, so where is he going to find a source for that? Amar le ya'an tahartich velo tihart mitumatach lo tithariod. So he says it's in this pasuk in Yechezkel that says that since I've been trying to purify you and you haven't purified yourself from your tuma, from your impurity, I'm not going to try anymore. You'll no longer be capable of becoming tahor. You lost your chance. Okay. Next one. Amar le Rava Rabbi Bar Mari, minaha milta da Amri Inshi. So Rava asked Rabbi Bar Mari, where does this popular saying come from? Bira deshatit mine lo tishti be'kala. A well that you drank from, you shouldn't throw a kala into it. Kala, as best I can tell, Jastrow thinks that this should mean you shouldn't throw a voice into it, meaning don't yell into the well. Steinsaltz thinks that it is a clod of dirt or a rock, which is occasionally the meaning of the word kala, and seems like a more likely thing to do to a well, but it's not the way this language usually works. In any case, it seems to be that you're supposed to show gratitude toward a well that you've drunk from, and you're not supposed to behave disrespectfully or destructively towards it. That's what's happening one way or the other, regardless of what it is you're not supposed to throw into the well. But I'm not 100% confident of the meaning of that word. In any case, Rabbi Bar Mari responds to him, Amar le dichtiv lo titaev edomi ki achichahu v'lo titaev mitzri ki ger hayita be'artzo. So he says, because there's this pasuk in Devarim that says that you should not hate or abhor or abominate or whatever this word means an Edomite because he is your brother, right? Edom is descended from Esav. Esav is Edom because he's, I guess, originally because he was reddish. That was, but whatever, that was his nickname, and so the people Edom are associated with him. So the Edomites are your relatives, so you have to not hate them, which is possibly not the same thing as loving them, but at least don't hate them. And you can't hate an Egyptian because you were a stranger in his land. Now that one seems like an odd instruction, because it's true that we were strangers in the Egyptian land, and the Egyptians took advantage of us to try to kill us, and they enslaved us, and they threw our babies in the Nile. And on the whole, it seems like by the end of the Exodus story, God doesn't like the Egyptians very much and is kind of upset that we don't hate them as much as he does. So this one's a little bit of a, I guess, literally a head scratcher. But there seems to be that even if you are a guest who is mistreated and who is welcomed only grudgingly and so on, that's still something for which you should have enough gratitude not to descend to the depths of hatred. That seems like a sort of a lukewarm source, by the way, for the idea that you should be grateful to a well that you drank from. There's no evidence that the well you drank from has done anything bad to you. So it seems like it's not as hearty an endorsement of gratitude as the statement he's looking for a source for. All right, next one. Amar le Rava le Rabbi bar Mari minaha milti damri inchi. So Rava asked Rabbi bar Mari, where does this popular saying come from? I dalit dura dalina v'i lo dalina. If you are going to lift the thing, then I'll lift it with you. If you won't lift it, then I'm not gonna. Which seems like a reasonable sort of thing to say. So he says it comes from here. Amar le dichtiv vayomer eleha barak im telchi imi v'halachti v'im lo telchi imi lo elech. Okay, so this is from the beginning of the story of Devorah, and she has summoned him and said, it's time for you to go to war for God. And he says, no, I'll only go if you come with me. If you come with me, I'm going to go. If you don't come with me, I'm not going. Which seems almost word for word the same as the saying here. So that works. Amar li Rava le Rabbi bar Mari minaha milti damri inchi. So Rava asked Rabbi bar Mari, where does this thing come from that people say, kad havyan zutri legavri hashid kashishna ledardiki. When we were small, we were little, people thought that we were men, or we thought we were men. And now that we're old, everybody treats us as children. So I think in its original popular saying arrangement, what that meant was that society has more respect for the young whippersnappers than it does for the wise people who actually know what's going on. But the source that he brings is going to be not quite that not quite that concrete. It's going to be a little more abstract. So Amar le me karakti. So he says in the beginning of the story of the Exodus, it says, "V'Hashem holech lifneihem yomam ba'amud anan lanchotam haderech v'layla ba'amud eish lahayir lahem." So at the beginning, and this is at the just before the splitting of the sea, I believe, God goes before them during the day in a pillar of cloud to guide them, and at night in a pillar of fire to light for them. Sounds like very impressive. God is accompanying you and leading you all by himself. V'levasof ketiv hinei anochi sholeach malach lefanecha lishmorcha b'derech. And here we are 10 chapters later, after the giving of the Torah, and God says, I'm going to send an angel to travel in front of you. So it seems like we are transposing this older and younger thing from the people in the popular saying who were not getting as much respect as adults as they did as children, onto the Jewish people. And we're saying that's why God himself doesn't think that the Jewish people are as worthy of guiding after the giving of the Torah as before, even though you might have thought it would be the other way around. And before the Torah, God himself shows up to hold our hand and show us where to go in the desert. And after the giving of the Torah, God sends a messenger. That is, it is a mysterious collection of psukim. It's not clear to me why it should work that way. But it does seem sort of to correspond with this popular saying. Okay. Amar le Rava le Rabbi bar Mari. And here's our last one. of this several pages long series. Minaha Milta de Amriyashi. Where does this thing come from? The people say, Batar Mari Nifsi Tsibi Mashach. You should drag tsibi, which are like wood chips, after the master of the property. Meaning, it seems that you should do whatever kind of work you can do to stay in the presence of the guy who's in charge, even if it seems like it's a very menial task, like moving wood chips. And so he says back to him, Dichtiv v'gam l'lot ha'olechet Avram hayatzon uvakar v'olim. So he said to him, as it says, and also Lot, who was going with Avram, had sheep and cattle and tents. So it seems like what we're saying is that the reason why Lot has sheep and cattle and tents is because he travels with Avram. And it is to Lot's advantage to be traveling with Avram because it's making him rich, even though he's not doing anything in particular when he's with him. And they don't mention it here, but Lot, once he's separated from Avram, has a number of misadventures that certainly include having all of his belongings taken away from him at least twice. Right, once in the War of the Four Kings against the Five Kings, and then again when he has to leave Sodom in the middle of the night without any of his stuff. And in the end, he finds himself living alone in a cave without stuff. So it seems like he is wealthier when he's with Avram. That does seem to be part of the story. All right, moving along. New character. Amar Rav Chanan. Rav Chanan said, Hamoser din al chavero hu ne'arash tchila. Rav Chanan says, if you ask God to judge somebody, then God will punish you first before he punishes the other person. Shneimar v'tomer Sarai el Avram chamasi alecha. And for this, we actually need not the part of the pasuk that they quoted, but the next bit. So let's open a Tanakh. We are in Breshit 16. In Parshat Lech Lecha, and 16:5 looks like. Okay, and Sarai and Avram have decided that Avram should, or it was mostly Sarai's idea, that Avram should marry Hagar in order to have a child. And Avram married Hagar. Hagar got pregnant. Hagar no longer has any respect for Sarai, and Sarai is not pleased with this new arrangement. I, as usual, have to say that I have very negative feelings toward the idea of slavery, but it is what it is. Okay, so Vatomer Sarai el Avram, Sarai said to Avram, Chamasi alecha, my anger or my violence or something like that is towards you. Anochi natati shichati b'chekecha. I put my slave girl in your arms. Vatera ki harata, and she saw that she's pregnant. Va'ekel beinehan, I seem unimportant in her eyes. Yishpot Hashem beini uveinecha. God should judge between me and you. And the God should judge between me and you is the part that we're interested in here. And we've seen this a number of times in this chapter. We've seen it in previous years also, that it's not that unusual that the Gemara will quote the beginning of the pasuk or the most famous part of the pasuk instead of the part that it actually needs. And so when you are learning on your own, you should always look up the whole verse and ideally the whole passage, because otherwise you may not even be looking at the part that the Gemara is actually talking about. Okay, in any case, so Sarai said that Avram should be judged, or God should choose between Sarai and Avram. And then Uchtiv, and it says, 2 parshas later at the beginning of Chayei Sarah, Vayavo Avraham lispod l'Sarah v'livkota, and it said, and Avram came to eulogize Sarah and to mourn her. Obviously, the reason why he's doing that is because Sarah is dead. Right? Sarah predeceases Avraham by decades. So I think the suggestion here is that Sarah asked, she was Sarai at the time, asked to have God judge between the two of them. In fact, God did judge between the two of them. God decided that he liked Abraham better. He got rid of Sarai and kept Abraham. Right? It's a very dangerous thing to ask God to judge between you and somebody else, because maybe you'll lose. Right? That seems to be the thing. Okay. But Rav Chanan notes, but that this principle that we've established, which seems to be that you shouldn't ask God to judge between you and somebody else, that principle only applies if it's not possible to get if it is possible to get human judgment against this person. If you have access to a legal system in which you could get justice, then God is going to take preemptive action against you if you ask God to judge the person. But it sounds like Rav Chanan acknowledges that if you're in a situation where your only recourse is to ask God for help, then God is not going to think less of you for asking for help. Okay, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Oy lo litzoek yoter min hanitzach. So this is a very similar thing that Rabbi Yitzchak says. He says it's more of an oy for the person who is complaining than for the person who is complained about. Meaning, again, if you complain, God is going to punish you worse than the person that you're complaining about. Which there are passages in the Torah that this is very hard to read with, but there are also passages that it's not so hard to read with. So, yeah. Okay. Tanya Namihachi, and there's also a Braita that seems to be almost identical to Rabbi Yitzchak, and by dint of that, also very similar to Rav Chanan. Echad hatzoek ve'echad hanitzak b'mashma ela shemimaharin latzoek yoter min hanitzak. So the Braita says actually that God is going to punish both the complainer and the complained about. They're both talked about in Shemot 22, which we'll get to in 1 second. The only difference between them is that they here is probably God or the angels or something, hurry to punish the complainer more. Okay, so now we need to go to Shemot 22 and see what Shemot 22:22 is. Because here the Gemara seems to be referencing a text it didn't even bother to quote at all. So that's also a thing that can happen. Okay. And here we are. Don't take advantage of a stranger and don't pressure him, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. Don't oppress the any widow or orphan. If you will oppress them or him, and then he will call out to me, Shamoa eshmat sakato, I will hear his cry. V'chara api v'haragti etchem b'charev v'ayu neshechem amanot uvnechem yetomim. Then I will be angry. This is God talking, and I will kill you with a sword. That's you, the person who apparently was oppressing widows and orphans. And then your wives will be widows and your children will be orphans. Okay, so now on a very superficial reading of this is that God, if a widow or an orphan calls out to God and says, help me, this person is oppressing me, then God turns and attacks the person who's oppressing them. And it doesn't actually seem to support our point at all. However, if you look a little more closely, the fact is the way that God says he's going to punish the oppressor is by turning his family into widows and orphans. So it seems, in fact, like it's not so much that the widows and orphans that the guy originally oppressed are going to have their situation made worse. That is not what's happening here. What's happening here is that widows and orphans in general are having their situation made worse because somebody complained about this guy, because now there are more widows and orphans, and more widows, presumably, in order for the punishment to be complete, those widows and orphans also need to be oppressed. So there does seem to be an odd circularity to this situation in which the punishment sort of remanufactures the crime instead of fitting the crime. And I think that is what they are referencing here. Okay. The Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and then Rabbi Yitzchak said something else, and this seems to be connected just because it's also Rabbi Yitzchak, it's the same person. He says, he says, don't ever let the curse of a regular person be unimportant in your eyes. And here I have to point out that the person that we're describing as a regular person is a king. And I think that there is a not so subtle undertone here of rabbis are important and good, and kings are just regular people who happen to be oppressing people. I think it's not even subtle. Okay, in any case, Shehare Avimelech kilel et sarav yitkayim b'zara. So his example of this situation is that Avimelech, Melech Gerar, Avimelech the king of Gerar, cursed Sarah, and the curse came true, in not for her but for her kid. Now you might have difficulty finding a curse in these verses, but Rabbi Yitzchak managed it. Shneimar v'inehu lach ksut einayim. So this is a thing that happens after Avimelech took Sarah prisoner, planning to marry her when she came to visit, and as she and Avraham apparently frequently did, they lied about who she was and said that she was Avram's sister, and she gets carried off to the king's harem, at which point God comes to Avimelech in a dream and says, I think we saw this story a couple of weeks ago, and says, I'm gonna destroy you and your family. You're gonna die because she's a married woman. And in the end, at the end of the story, as Avimelech is sending Sarah and Avram off, unlike Paro, who has a very similar scene but doesn't do this, Avimelech actually addresses Sarah directly in the second person and apologizes to her. And part of what he says to her is, this stuff that I gave the man who you said was your brother is meant to be an eye covering for you, which the pshat of that probably is something like it will make you feel less embarrassed. It will make you feel like you can, close your eyes and forget about this, because I've, given you this apology gift. But that's not how Rabbi Yitzchak is reading it. Rabbi Yitzchak is reading it literally as this, I hope this stuff covers your eyes. Okay, so, and he's got a story, a backstory for that. Amarla, so he thinks that what Avimelech is really saying is, Ho'il v'chisit mimeni v'lo gilit shehu ishech v'garamt elai hatzar hazeh. So since it's your fault, you hid from me, you didn't tell me that he's your husband, and you caused me all of this suffering. Therefore, yehi ratzon sheyu lach b'nei kisui einayim. I hope, I pray to God that you will have blind children. That's what Rabbi Yitzchak thinks that Avimelech is saying to Sarah. And then it's easy enough to see where that happens. V'nitkayim b'zara, and it came true in her child, or Sarah only has one child. Dichtiv vayiki zaken Yitzchak vatichena inav merot. That when Yitzchak got old, and his eyesight dimmed and he couldn't see, right? And that's the background for the story with the blessing for Yaakov and Esav. The reason why Yaakov is able to pull off this deception by wearing goat skins and carrying food that his mom made is because Yitzchak can't see. And so he relies on feeling his kids to tell which is which and smelling them. And Yaakov wears Esav's clothes. So now he smells like him, and he's got this, goat skin covering on the parts of him that his father's likely to touch. So he feels hairy, and it works. But that only worked, as I said, because Yitzchak is blind. If Yitzchak could see, that would not work at all. So in Rabbi Yitzchak's interpretation here, everything else that happens in the rest of the Torah happens as a result of this curse from Avimelech. And that's why Yaakov is able to steal the blessing. So Yaakov ends up in Lavan's house, and he ends up with these wives and with these children, and then we end up in Egypt, and then everything else. Okay, and the point there is that Avimelech was an ordinary person. He's not a particularly holy guy. He's not a prophet. He's not God's favorite person. But when he prays that something should happen, it happens. And so you should be careful not to upset even people for whom you don't have any respect. You should be careful not to upset them, because if they ask God to hurt you, he might. And that seems to be an ongoing theme here, is that whenever anybody complains to God, everybody gets squished. It seems to be our ongoing theme for the evening, which is not a cheerful theme, sadly, but it is what it is. Okay. So Rabbi Abahu said you should always be one of the ones that is chaste and not one of the ones that chases, prey and not predator. Because the birds that are most chaste of all birds are the Tor and the Ben Yonah. And those are the only two birds that God said you could bring on the altar as sacrifices. And so that tells you that God likes that kind of bird better. They're definitely always prey and never predator, partly because they're really super tiny. And so that tells you that God likes prey animals better than predator animals. It seems to me that it's not that hard to demonstrate that from which animals are kosher among the larger animals as well, but apparently he wanted to do it with the birds. Okay, back when we were still having a legal topic in this chapter, we were going through the Mishnah, and we had quoted, our most recent Mishnah was about a case in which a person had asked somebody else to injure them and promised that the assailant wouldn't be held liable. And we are now returning to that Mishnah. So it had said that the assailant is held liable anyway, even if a person says, cut off my arm or blind my eyes. But the person is not found liable if you say, break my dishes or rip my clothing or something like that. As long as you said, and don't worry, I won't sue you, then now you can't sue. And the person had the right to do what you told them to do, and they're not liable for the damage. Okay, so Amarle Rav Asi Bar Chama LeRava. So Rav Asi Bar Chama said to Rava, Maishna Reisha or Maishna Seifa. He said, what is the difference between the cases at the beginning where you are liable even if you were promised you wouldn't be, and the cases at the end where you are not liable if you were promised you wouldn't be? So Rava responds, Reisha lefi she'ein adam mochel al rashei ivarim. So Rava says, look, the beginning, you're liable anyway because people don't really mean it if they tell you that it's okay to cut off pieces of their body. Now, presumably, Rava would make a different analysis of a situation in which it was unquestionably in the medical best interest of the person to have body parts cut off, right? If we were talking about, amputating a limb that's going to kill you with gangrene, or removing a cancer tumor or something like that, I think that would be different. But here we're just talking about a healthy body part that you just, tell somebody it's okay to cut off. And Rava said people don't ever really mean that. So the court looks at the situation and they judge that, in fact, the person didn't really mean to agree to it. So it's not okay for the assailant to do it. So Rav Asi Bar Chama responds to him. He said, wait a minute, your logic is not going to work, because people also don't really agree to be made to suffer significant pain. And I have a braita that says something very similar about pain. Detanya, hakini pitzaini, not liftor patur. So the braita says, if somebody says, hit me and bruise me, so we're not talking here about a permanent injury. We're just talking about an unpleasant experience. And on condition that you'll be exempt. If the guy in fact attacks him, he is in fact exempt. So that seems like this people don't really agree to having their bodies attacked thing. That's not going to hold up, because you could say the same thing about pain, and we don't apparently say it. So Ishtik, Rava was silent. And then Amar Midi Shmiel Apaha. So he said, "What did you hear anything about this? Like, if you're asking these questions, are you asking them because you know the answer by any chance?" Amar Le, so he said to him, Hachi Amar Rav Sheshet Mishum Pegam Mishpacha. So he says back to him, the Rav Sheshet at least explained it as being about the damage to the family. So here's the thing. If you agree to let somebody cause you pain in a way that doesn't permanently damage your body, that is, in a sense, between you and the assailant. It's not any of anybody else's business. Whereas if you agree to have somebody chop your nose off, theoretically, the other people who depend on you for being part of your family, either in terms of emotional familyness or financial, either way, they have a say in that. If you are suddenly going to look grotesque, it might in fact be to their financial disadvantage to be related to somebody who looks grotesque. And so you're actually, your nose isn't yours to give away. Your bruises might be yours to give away because those are temporary, but your nose and your ears and your arms and your legs, those are not. Your family has some say in them as well. That's what Rav Cheses says. So we now have two theories here. Rava, who says you never really mean it when you say people can cut pieces of your body off. And Rav Cheses, who says because other people have a right to prevent you from doing that. And now we're going to have some more. Itzmar. So we have actually a list of Amoraim here and their reasons. So Rabbi Oshaya Amar, Mishum Pagam Mishpacha. Rabbi Oshaya says the same thing that Rav Sheshet said a minute ago, that it's because of the damage to the family reputation. Rav Amar, Mishum She'en Adam Mochel Al Roshei Ivarim Shelo. Rava says the same thing here that he said before, that because you can't get out of paying because nobody ever really means it when they tell you that you can cut off a part of their body. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yesh hein shehu kalav v'yesh lav shehu kain. Rabbi Yochanan says yes can be no, no can be yes, and I assume that means that the court is supposed to adjudicate whether the assailant was supposed to know that he wasn't really supposed to do whatever it is he's being asked to do. Okay, and now the Gemara quotes a braita to support Rabbi Yochanan, giving some examples of what it means to say yes and have it mean no, or vice versa. And yes, I know that this is a controversial and difficult claim to make now, but let's look at the cases in the braita and see what we can make of them. And that's what we got. So Tanya Namihachi. Hakini Pizzaini, not liftor, the Amar Lohain, Hare yesh hein shehu kalov. So if somebody says, hit me, bruise me, the other person says, really? And I won't be, and will I be exempt? And the original person says, yep, you're going to be exempt. And then that is a yes that is really a no. Meaning, this Breita thinks that if you said, hit me and bruise me, you didn't mean it. You're not probably even capable of meaning that. And the potential assailant should know that you don't mean it, and they shouldn't hit you. And if they do hit you, they're liable just like any other assailant would be. Okay. Karad ksuti amanat liftor v'amar lo lav ahare lav shehu kain. This one's going to be a little harder. If somebody says, tear my clothes, and the other person says, really, will I be exempt? And the first person says, no, you won't be exempt. This is a no that really means yes. So here, it seems like the Breita is saying that if somebody told you to destroy their property, the implication is that you're going to be exempt from damages, even if they told you you're not going to be exempt from damages, and that's a no that means yes. So if we wanted, in a sort of modern light, to maintain no means no, it would seem that even this Breita, and maybe even Rabbi Yochanan, although he doesn't comment further, but even this Breita thinks that with respect to your body, not only does no mean no, but yes also means no. It's just sometimes with your stuff, yes means yes, and no also means yes. Yes.
I have a question in terms of consistency here.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't there a story, I believe it's in early Malachim, when one of the Nevi'im asks somebody to hit him, and the guy refuses, and he's punished by having an animal attack him?
That does sound familiar, but I don't remember exactly what the context is. It's certainly possible. And yeah, I don't remember. But we have had, by the way, an inconsistency even inside this Gemara. In the last page, we've had an inconsistency about whether if somebody says hit me, whether you're supposed to do it or not. Right. And all right, we had one Breita that said if somebody says hit me and you'll be exempt, then the person should hit him and he's exempt. And now we've got one that says if somebody says hit me and you'll be exempt, he doesn't mean it and you shouldn't do it. So I think we've got a live dispute right here on the page. And yes, it would be interesting to see what they would do with that story. But we have both positions represented here. So yeah. Okay, so we go to our next quote from the Mishnah, which was the part about destroy my stuff and if you say destroy my stuff and you don't say and don't worry you'll be exempt, then he's not exempt. But if you say destroy my stuff and you'll be exempt, then he is exempt. That was the Mishnah. And now we bring what appears to be a contradiction to it. Uraminhi. And uraminhi is a language that you use when you're bringing a contradiction from another source of similar authority. Right. So we are now going to quote another Mishnah or Breita. And Mishnayot and Breitot are allowed to contradict each other. That's actually, it's not a problem. But it might mean that we didn't really understand what we're reading. We might have misunderstood something if we think that it means something that's the opposite of what another text means. And we're going to have to analyze it and make sure that we're understanding things correctly. Okay, so this other text says, it quotes back in Shemot 22, actually, right where we were before. Hold on a second while I close the window. We seem to be having some weather here. Sorry. So we're back in Shemot 22, this time 22:6. And this is the beginning of the discussion of responsibility for other people's stuff left in your possession. Right, and it says, if a man gives his friend silver or objects, vessels, to watch, and then they're stolen from the person who's doing the guarding. If you find the thief, he will pay double. And then it goes on to say, if you don't find the thief, that the guard is going to have to either pay for the stuff or swear that it wasn't his fault. I believe we have seen this text before in other contexts. Okay, so our Breita here actually, though, isn't really that interested in what's going to happen to the guard or the stuff. They're interested in the definition of guarding. Under what circumstances am I actually liable for other people's stuff just because it happens to be in my possession? And so it says, lishmor v'lo la'abed, lishmor v'lo likroa, lishmor v'lo l'chalek lani. So guarding means it was given to you to guard and not to destroy. It was given to you to guard and not to tear. And it was given to you to guard and not to distribute to the poor. Meaning you're only responsible for what happens to property that's entrusted to you if you're actually supposed to be taking care of it. That seems on the surface to be what's happening here. So Amar of Huna, whereas in our Mishnah, it seemed to say that if somebody says, here, take my thing and rip it, and you'll be exempt. Sorry, they say, here, take my thing and rip it, and they don't say you'll be exempt, then they have to pay for it. It sounds like they were responsible for maybe not exactly taking care of it, but at least not deliberately destroying it, even though it was given to them to destroy. So they shouldn't be in the category of a guard to begin with. They should be in some other category, some other less responsible category, presumably. Amar Rav Huna, lo kashya hada ati liyade, hada lo ati liyade. So Rav Huna says that's okay because they're talking about different cases. The Breita that says that you're not a guard at all if something is given to you to tear or to destroy is talking about when if you were given it but let me back up. Let me start with the other one. Our Mishnah, which says that if you said, take my thing and destroy it, and you won't be exempt, you're not exempt, that is talking about a case in which, in fact, the person took responsibility for the object before they were told to destroy it. That's why they're not going to be exempt, is because it didn't happen in exactly the order I just said. What actually happened is first I hand you the shirt and said, here, hold my shirt. And then once you're holding it, I say, okay, tear my shirt up. But the problem is once I said, here, hold my shirt, you're already a guard. You're already responsible for it. And I have to do something more than say, tear my shirt in order to remove that responsibility from you. Okay, that's one possibility. Or I could say, tear my shirt without giving it to you first, in which case you are not responsible. You're not a guard, at least in part because I didn't give it to you, but also because the only relationship you have to it is that you've been told to destroy it. And so in that case, you would be not a guard and therefore not responsible. Okay, Amar le Rabba. So Rabba said to him, Lishmor da'ati liyadei mashma. Rabba said, no, this doesn't make any sense. You can't say that the case in which you are not a guard, so you don't have any responsibility, is a case where you never even touched the thing. Because that's not what guard means. Guard means somebody gave it to you and said, take care of this. Somebody never discussing their object with you and never giving you their object, and you had no relationship with the object, it doesn't make any sense to even call that guard to begin. Like, I don't need a Breita to tell me that person's not a guard. So it has to be talking about a case that's more substantive than that. So Elam Rabba. So Rabba says instead we should say Havaha da'atali yade velo kasha. Both of them are situations where the guy actually did receive the object to care for it, but one of them, he got the thing as something he's supposed to care for first, and then afterwards was told to destroy it. And on the other case, he was told to destroy it before he was handed it. All right, so in this case, in both cases, I'm handing you my shirt. But in the case where you're going to be responsible, I hand you the shirt first. And then once you're holding it, I say, okay, now rip the shirt. And in the case where you're not going to be responsible, before I hand you the shirt, I say, I'm going to give you a shirt to rip up. Please rip it up when I give it to you. And then I hand you the shirt. So Rabba says that's the distinction. Okay. But in the meantime, incidentally, we have mentioned that giving somebody money to distribute to the poor is not a situation where they are going to be liable for what happens to the money, which is itself a really interesting thing, but not really our topic. So now we're going to tell a story about that. So there's a wallet or a money bag, something like that, full of money that arrives in Pumbedita. Pumbedita is a city in Babylonia. Afkeda Rav Yosef Gabe Hahu Gabra. So Rav Yosef asked a particular guy to watch it for him, to take care of it. Pashaba, but the guy does not take good care of it. He is negligent toward it. We don't know exactly what he does, but whatever it is, it's not what he was supposed to do. And Atugan Viganbuha. Then some thieves came, some robbers came, and they took it. Rav Yosef judged that this guy who was supposed to be watching the money is liable and he has to replace the money. Amarle Abaye, so Abaye says to him, Abaye is Rav Yosef's student. Abaye says to him, Abaye says, but wait a minute, we just quoted a Breita that says that if you are given money to distribute to the poor, then you are not a guard. You're not responsible for that money. And Rav Yosef says back to him, Amarle Anye de Pumbedita mikatz kaitz lehu v'lishmorhu. So he says that poor Pumbedita get the same amount of money every week. It's a fixed amount. And therefore, the person who's holding the money is in fact responsible. They are in fact a guard. So here I think is what is going on here, at least at the beginning of a theory, which is to say that if your job is to just give money out to anybody who happens to show up and you use your judgment, and if they show up and they say, I need a lot of money, you give them a lot of money. If they show up and they say, I just need a little bit, you give them a little bit. But there's no rules and there's no plan, and you just, give money to people who show up. Then in fact, a person put in that position cannot be held liable afterwards if they gave too much money to the wrong person. Or even for that matter, if they can't account for what happened to the money at all, because that's just chaos. That's a mess. And it's sort of definitionally a situation you can't hold people accountable for. But if you have a situation where your rule is, for each member of your family, you get the cost of a week's groceries for one person, which is X amount of money. And then people come and they say, here are my 3 children. And then you give them 4 people's worth of money, and you have a system that you can hold people accountable for. You can do accounting on that. And this guy can absolutely be held accountable. Presumably not just for theft. Presumably he could also be held accountable if he gave out the wrong amount of money to people or gave it to them at the wrong time or whatever else would break the rules. Okay, that is the end of our chapter. That is the end of the semester and the end of the school year. Are there questions? Okay. Well, if you think of anything, feel free to email it. And hopefully we'll have a whole new chapter next fall. I will haven't figured out what I want to teach yet, but I'll, publicize it when I figure it out. And in the meantime, have a wonderful summer.
You too.
Thank you, and Lashka.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.